Today I'm out here in windy Southern California taking a look at the all-new 2019 Chevy Blazer. Now for me, when I think of Chevy Blazer, my mind immediately goes to a 1980s K5 Blazer. But this is a very different kind of vehicle. This is no longer based on a pickup truck like the Blazer and the Trailblazer. Instead, this is actually most closely related to the Cadillac XT5. It starts as a front-wheel drive vehicle, but we also have an all-wheel drive system available with basic torque vectoring ability. In this generation, the Blazer is designed to compete very directly with the Ford Edge, the Nissan Murano, and of course, the brand new Honda Passport as well. Up front, Chevy chose to style this a little bit differently than the smaller Equinox or the larger Chevy Traverse. We have kind of a spindle grille look here that actually reminds me a little bit of the Lexus RX. Now, there are a few different grilles going on. If you get the base model, then we don't get these shiny black bits. And if you get the RS trim, then we get more of an egg crate design that's designed to be a little bit sportier. Also changed in the RS trim, this large chrome bar that goes from one side of the bumper to the other becomes sort of a dark chrome look to give it a more sporty appearance. All models have the same basic headlamp arrangement. What you're looking at down here is not a fog light. These are actually the headlamps. We have HID lamps standard in all models, and then the turn signals are actually below that headlamp module. What you see up here is actually just a daytime running light strip, accent LED strip, whatever you want to call it. This is not actually a headlamp module. So this arrangement is actually a little bit more like the Hyundai Kona or that first generation Jeep Cherokee. To create the Blazer, Chevy didn't just take the Equinox and blow it up a little bit. In some ways, they actually took some of their larger crossovers and shrunk them down. The closest relation to this in the GM lineup is really probably the Cadillac XT5, although it borrows just about as much from the larger Chevy Traverse and of course the GMC Acadia. You'll really notice that when you approach the vehicle because it has a wide and low presence to it. It's about as wide as the Chevy Traverse, only it's about as tall off the ground as a Chevy Equinox, so it definitely has a wider, more muscular feel. One of the reasons Chevy did that is so that they could put 265 width tires on the top end trims. So this has much wider tires than you find in the Equinox. At 191.4 inches long, this is on the large side for the mid-size two-row crossover segment. It really is only about 1 inch shorter than a Toyota Highlander, and the Highlander is available with 3 rows, not 2 rows like we see in the Blazer. So this is definitely for someone that wants the size of the Highlander, but doesn't need the extra third row in the back. This is also for someone that wants something that's a little bit more stylish than the average compact crossover, and you'll really see that definitely in the overall roofline and the window line. The roofline drops a little bit as it goes to the rear, makes it look a little bit sportier, and then we have this accent line that kicks up here towards the rear. In case you're wondering, this is actually 7 inches longer than a 1980 Chevy Blazer. And that's a little surprising to me because the Blazer always seemed so big back then, but in reality, it would actually only come to right about here on the 2019 Blazer. Out back, we find distinctive tail lamp modules with LED strips in each of these modules right here. You'll find the turn signals on the outboard side, and they are red, not amber. At the bottom of the bumper, we have dual exhaust tips in every trim. The base models get round versions, top-end trims get these well-integrated ones in the bumper. Behind this little hatch right here, we find the tow hitch receiver. You can tow up to 4,500 pounds when properly equipped. You'll notice that the overall styling is perhaps a little bit less adventurous than the front, but we definitely have some strong curves that mimic that overall shape up front. Again, this reminds me a little bit of the Lexus RX. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Much like the Hyundai Santa Fe, but a little bit different than most of the competition, the Blazer starts out with a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. It produces 193 horsepower. That engine is mated to a standard 9-speed automatic transmission and front-wheel drive only. If you want all-wheel drive in your Blazer, you have to step up to this engine, which is a 3.6-liter V6 that produces 308 horsepower, one of the best figures in this segment, and 270 pound-feet of torque. All-wheel drive is optional, but you can get it with this particular engine. The best fuel economy will obviously be in the 4-cylinder model, where you should expect 25 miles per gallon average. If you bump up to the V6, that will drop down to 22 for the front-wheel drive model or 21 for the all-wheel drive model, but you will get the best towing capacity at 4,500 pounds. This is a little bit more power than we find in the average V6 entry in this segment, although if you choose the Ford Edge, you do have the option of some twin-turbo V6s under the hood, and if you choose a Jeep Grand Cherokee, you can get a V8 as well. If you choose the option for all-wheel drive, then we actually get 2 different all-wheel drive systems available in the Blazer. The first one is found in most trims, and that has an axle disconnect feature which will completely disconnect the rear axle from the front of the vehicle to help improve fuel economy. But aside from that, it's a pretty standard all-wheel drive system. The next one is a twin clutch system, which can not only disconnect itself from the front axle, again to help save on fuel, but it also adds the ability to direct torque across the rear axle. GM is stopping just short of calling this particular system torque vectoring, because according to the SAE definition, this would not qualify because it does not have the ability to overdrive the rear axle like we do see in the Honda and Acura systems. So this system, in terms of overall performance, slots somewhere between your average all-wheel drive system and that next step up, which would be something like Acura's super handling all-wheel drive. Front seat comfort is fairly average for this particular segment. We have a power driver's seat in the model that we're driving, but even though this is the very top-end Premier trim, we don't have four-way adjustable lumbar support, which I think is a little bit of a pity. We do, however, have a memory-linked powered tilt telescopic steering column, which is something that you generally don't find in this particular group. Very much like the Honda Passport or the Nissan Murano, but unlike some of the other alternatives like the Jeep Grand Cherokee, you cannot get a power passenger seat that matches the same range of motion as the driver's seat. So this other seat over here on this side does not have the adjustable lumbar support, and the seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt. It just moves up and down. Even though the Blazer is fairly large on the outside, overall interior room actually falls behind some of the competition, most notably that new Santa Fe, the Murano, and the Edge. You'll notice that when it comes to overall combined legroom, we find a little bit less than some of those larger entries. However, this does still beat the new Honda Passport and most of the compact crossovers out there. One of the reasons that you might want to step up into this mid-size segment is definitely for improved rear seat room. You can see sitting right here behind myself, I have several inches of legroom left. And even though this particular one is the model with the optional panoramic roof, I still have about ½ an inch of headroom left. Now, if you got the model without the panoramic moonroof, then you would actually gain about 1.5 inches of overall rear headroom. The rear seats also recline. They have a pretty decent recline to them, which makes these seats quite comfortable. Another reason you might want to get a mid-size two-row like this is for improved room across the rear bench, because this rear bench is definitely wider than you find in the average compact crossover. That's really going to be noticeable if you try and put 3 adults across the back here, or if you needed to put child seats and adults, or just 3 child seats across the back of your crossover. This is going to handle it a lot better than some of those smaller options in America. Other nice touches in this Premier trim are a softly padded center armrest right there. We have outboard heated rear seats. You'll find the controls on the doors. We have HVAC vents in the center console, USB charge ports. There's actually even a USB-C charge port, which is the newer standard, and a 120-volt inverter outlet that's good for 150 watts. When it comes to cargo capacity, the Blazer falls a little bit behind the competition. We have 30.5 cubic feet of storage space back here. Chevy tells us that they were concentrating on making this squarer and, of course, a little bit more accommodating for longer items like golf clubs, but this is about 10 cubic feet below the new Honda Passport. Under the cargo area load floor, we actually find a spare tire, another nice touch compared to some of those compact crossovers out there, and there's also a little bit of additional storage hiding right there under the floor. If you opt for some of the top-end trims, then we get a cargo management system. We have aluminum rails right there embedded into the floor in the back, and then you can get different accessories that latch into there. The rear seats can be folded from inside the cabin. There's a lever on the side of the seats that also functions as the recline lever, or we have one right back here in the cargo area. If I pull on that, then the rear seats do fold, and they fold completely flat with the cargo area in the back, making it very easy to push bags from the cargo area right there onto the rear seats. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end Premier trim. This is basically the most expensive that you can get your Chevy Blazer. This particular model has the optional large panoramic moonroof. As you can see, it stretches all the way back there to just over the rear passengers' heads. Up front, we have height adjustable shoulder belts and two-way adjustable headrests. The top-end Premier trim has perforated leather upholstery because these seats are both heated and ventilated, and to help distinguish it a little bit better, we have a little accent strip right there in the piping. It's gray, sort of a burgundy and white. You'll find that on all 4 seats and on the dashboard as well. And then we have a small faux suede insert right there in the shoulder area. Overall interior materials quality is a little bit above your average compact crossover, just as you'd expect. We have soft touch areas right here in this sort of tan section. The upper section of the door is a hard plastic that's then had a rubbery coating applied, and then the bottom part of the door right around that bottle holder, that's a hard plastic. Moving on over to the dashboard, We find a similar mixture of materials. We have a stitched section of the dashboard right here in this charcoal. We have an accent strip that mirrors what was going on that seat. There's a chrome bar that runs across the dashboard in this version. If you opt for the Sporty or RS trim, then this turns into more of a dark chrome. Now, above and below this soft touch section right here, we actually find some hard plastics. So right down there, right by the glove box, and then above at the top of the dashboard. The glove box is opened via that button right there, and we actually find a very large bin-style glove compartment. I would have no problem putting large tablet computers in there. In the middle of the dashboard, we find a center channel speaker. Again, this is where you'd find those harder plastics, more soft touch material that wraps all the way over to the driver's side. And then we have a standard 8-inch color touchscreen infotainment system nestled right here into the middle of the dashboard. You'll find the engine start, stop button over here on the left, and then some physical buttons for this infotainment screen below it. We have a home button, track forward, backward, back, and then a power and volume knob. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard in this generation of the system, and this uses kind of a tweaked version of the software that we've seen from General Motors vehicles before. This version of the software features a home screen where we can see the optional factory navigation readout. We can click on the shortcut buttons at the bottom to get quick access to our climate controls, our navigation's built in, phone interface, media interface, etc. You can use the car's built-in media interface, or you can use the CarPlay media interface. I can get back to CarPlay by just pressing and holding that home button. Pressing the home button again will take us back to the home screen where we can see our OnStar services. One of the changes in this version of the software is we now have user profiles available and settable that will allow you to move settings between vehicle and vehicle. And of course, we have the app integration here as well. Now, it's worth noting that you won't find the app navigation or that profile ability in the base model of the Blazer. You do have to step your way on up one trim level in order to get that. Below the infotainment system, we find the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control. We have buttons for the seat heating and ventilation, a small LCD showing us the temperature setting for each side, and then a very thin row of buttons right there under that dashboard. It's neat and tidy. The temperature is controlled via this ring around these large air vents. As you can see, you rotate them around to set the temperature. Then we have an open and close knob right there in the middle, and you can move them around to direct the air as you want. Between those air vents, we have a USB-C and a standard USB interface. Below that, we have a wireless charging mat. I was easily able to fit my larger smartphone right down there. And then we have a pretty traditional console shifter here with drive all the way there, and then low one notch back. There are then some buttons over here on the side that allow you to toggle gear up and down. For some reason, we don't find paddle shifters on any version of the Blazer. We then have two large cup holders there, and then a drive mode knob right here. If we were in the model with all-wheel drive, we would have some additional modes and the option to turn off the all-wheel drive system entirely in order to help save on fuel. We have a button to enable and disable the parking sensors and the lane keeping assistance system. Between the front seats, we have a padded armrest with a faux suede insert right there, and this opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment with some additional USB ports. Again, USB-C and standard USB. There's also the SD card slot for the mapping database and a 12-volt power port. A nice touch with this system is that you can actually leave your smartphone connected right here in the center console and interact with CarPlay, or you can actually put it on that other USB port that's right there between those air vents. It's up to you. Top-end Blazer models get this combination LCD and physical instrument cluster where we have that physical tachometer, fuel level, and engine temperature gauge, and then this large LCD in the middle. The LCD appears to be borrowed out of some of Chevy's larger trucks, and it's controlled in a very similar fashion. We have our pretty typical trip computer information right out there on the screen. We can also toggle over and get audio system information, navigation, turn-by-turn directions, phone information, and configure the display to a limited extent. On the left side of the steering wheel, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control in this particular trim. That is not a standard feature like we do find in some of the competition. It is optional, however. We then have a button to turn on and off the heated steering wheel functionality, a voice command button, phone hang-up button, and then this button module controls that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. You don't find volume up, down, or track up, down buttons on the front of the steering wheel. They're instead on the back. So we have track up and down over here on the left, volume up and down on the right. And as I said before, one thing that we don't find on the steering wheel at all are shift paddles on the back. I do think that's unfortunate. Out at the launch event, we were able to drive both the 2.5-liter version and the 3.6-liter version of the Blazer. Obviously, the 3.6 is going to be the fastest, but I was actually surprised that the 2.5 felt pretty peppy. Now, the 2.5-liter engine is kind of an interesting twist in this segment because this is really one of the only entries that offers a two-engine lineup like that, the other one being the Hyundai Santa Fe. Both of those vehicles produce about the same kind of power, but the Santa Fe has an 8-speed, not a 9-speed, and it doesn't seem to have as aggressive of a first gear, so the Blazer actually feels a little bit peppier than the Hyundai. Now this 3.6-liter V6 is, on the other hand, one of the most powerful entries in this segment, so I suspect slightly better overall performance out of this than most of the competition. Of course, that is excluding the performance entries in this segment like the Edge ST or a V8 Grand Cherokee, if you want to compare this to something along those lines. Although we haven't been able to do our official 0 to 60 testing in this vehicle yet, I suspect it is going to be pretty identical to the last Cadillac XT5 that we tested, because overall this is about the same size and about the same curb weight, so expect this to come in right around 6.5 seconds. If you get the 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine, expect it to be around 8.5, perhaps 9 seconds. So the base engine is going to be pretty similar to the average compact crossover in America, and this is definitely going to be faster. One of the reasons that you might want to get the Blazer over the average compact crossover is the overall performance. The other reason is the overall handling ability, because the model that we're driving here has 265 width tires. These are notably wider than anything you'll find in the mainstream compact crossover segment. And even though this weighs a little bit more than something like a RAV4 or a CRV or Chevy's own Equinox, this is definitely going to hold the road a little bit better. I've actually been pretty impressed overall with the overall driving dynamics of this. Now that shouldn't surprise you too much, because General Motors does have a reputation for making good driving front-wheel drive based vehicles. Now this particular trim that we're driving at the moment is the front-wheel drive version, and surprisingly there's very little torque steer. Now obviously if you get the all-wheel drive system, then we don't really get any torque steer, and of course it has that mild torque vectoring ability. Now an interesting twist here, of course, is that General Motors isn't really calling their system torque vectoring, and that's because they're trying to follow the SAE definitions, and the SAE definition says that you have to overdrive the rear axle in order to actually call it a torque vectoring system. So this is going to be different than what we find in the Honda Passport. The Passport and the Honda Pilot and other Acura vehicles can actually send 70% of engine power to the rear axle depending on the circumstances. This vehicle will never send more than 50% unless the front axle is slipping. If the front axle starts to slip, then it can send more to the rear. That's different than what we find in the Honda or the Acura. Those two vehicles will feel a little bit more like a rear-wheel drive car if you're really starting to drive it hard in the corners. This, on the other hand, has a very stable and planted feel, but it's never going to get tail happy like sometimes those Honda vehicles can, especially if you're out on a looser surface. Now, General Motors tells us that if you get this out on gravel, then it will be able to send a little bit more power to the rear because of the way that the front tires are losing traction in those corner situations, but again, it's never going to feel quite like what we see in the Honda Passport. It's also worth noting that the mechanical rear system It's also worth noting that the rear differential in this vehicle will not function like a mechanical limited slip differential like we do see in that Honda. Now that makes sense because General Motors has definitely designed this to be a very on-road focused vehicle. You can tell that in the firmness of the suspension, the fact that we have very little body roll, very little tip and dive when we step on the brakes, etc. This has a very planted feel to it, and a feel that is therefore quite different than the Toyota 4Runner or the Jeep Grand Cherokee. The last thing to know about the all-wheel drive system in the Blazer is that there are actually two different systems. The sort of torque vectoring system is only available in the RS and in the top-end Premier models. The other versions of the Blazer with all-wheel drive will actually get a variant of that system that does not feature that same torque vectoring ability. Both versions have the ability to completely disconnect the rear axle and turn this into a front-wheel drive only vehicle. You do that via the control knob right there in the center of the instrument cluster. You do that in order to overall improve highway fuel economy. So if you're going on a long road trip and you don't need that four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive ability, you can just turn it off and save about 1 mile per gallon overall. All trims of the Blazer have standard factory noise cancellation, so this is one of the quieter cabins in this segment on first appearance. Now obviously we won't have a final score until we can get this back at home and do our usual battery of tests there. We also won't have official fuel economy numbers until that time either, but you should expect fuel economy to be pretty similar to the mainline entries with V6s in this segment. Obviously, if you're interested in higher fuel economy, you should look at some of those compact crossovers. They're going to get you better overall fuel economy, and you will find available hybrids in those segments as well. And we don't really see that at this time in this mid-size two-row crossover segment. Instead, this segment is focused on style and improving performance. Overall, I have to say that the Blazer actually surprised me a little bit out on the road. I hadn't expected this to be quite as dynamic as it actually is. This really does feel very like the Cadillac XT5. That's actually a pretty good thing in this particular segment, because the Ford Edge feels a little bit big and definitely a little bit old at this time. The Nissan Murano is definitely on the softer side. With the Passport, Honda is chasing off-road ability, and then we have the more dedicated off-road focused Grand Cherokee and 4Runner. That makes the Blazer an interesting entry in this segment because this is focusing definitely on on-road driving dynamics, letting the rest of the competition chase the more off-road entries. Of course, the Blazer is still pretty capable off-road. We have decent ground clearance in this vehicle, but because of the overall firmer suspension and definitely the firmer roll bars, you're going to have a very firm experience off-road. So the bumps and chugs in the pavement, they're definitely going to be making their way into the cabin, so expect mild whiplash or slightly bruised kidneys if you're going to be spending hours and hours on an off-road trail. And now to the nitty-gritty. Putting one of these in your driveway will set you back at least $29,995. That's for the base model with the 2.5-liter engine, 9-speed automatic transmission, the 8-inch infotainment system that we saw on the dashboard, and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. CarPlay and Android Auto are two of the things that we don't find in a lot of the competition's absolute base models like the Honda Passport, but you actually do find on the Blazer. Now keep in mind that the Blazer is likely going to have larger discounts off MSRP than some of the competition. So as we take a look at the prices, keep in mind these are MSRP, but again, you're going to find a greater discount likely on the Chevy dealer lot. Now unfortunately, we can't really talk too much about discounts because they're constantly changing. If you want to get the V6 engine in your Blazer, that'll set you back at least $34,495. If you want leather, $38,695. If you want the RS trim, which is the sporty version of the Blazer, I did have an opportunity to drive that particular model. It gets an upgraded suspension system and tweaked interior parts, as well as a unique look on the outside. That'll set you back $41,795. The Premier trim, which is what we're looking at right here, this is one of the more expensive versions. $43,895 is where this starts, and it will end right around $51,000. Yes, you heard that right, $51,000. That would be for the top-end Blazer Premier with all-wheel drive. All-wheel drive is kind of an expensive option in the Blazer. It's over $2,000 on all the trims and gets more expensive as you work your way on up to the top. That's because the top-end models, the RS and the Premier, both get that twin-clutch, almost torque vectoring rear axle in the back. Now again, keep in mind that the Blazer is likely going to sell at a greater discount than some of the competition. So even though the top-end version of this may be around $51,000, actual dealer pricing, it may end up about the same as the top-end Honda Passport. Now bear in mind that we don't know any of those details just yet because this has just gone on sale now. You will actually find this on dealer lots, but a lot of the deals are likely going to come later in 2019. So if you're buying a Blazer immediately, you'll pay probably more for this than a Honda Passport, but if you wait a little time, then you may actually get this for about the same price as the Honda model. As I usually say, you'll have to wait until we can get our hands on one for a week so we can run it through our usual battery of comparisons and tests. But I can say immediately that the Blazer really impressed me with its overall driving nature. The 2.5-liter engine is a lot peppier than I thought it would be, and this 3.6-liter V6 definitely has some strong pull. Over 300 horsepower is one of the better power figures you'll find in this mainstream group, and of course we have that 9-speed automatic transmission, which really helps improve overall performance. And it's worth noting that this 9-speed is not related at all to the 9-speed that we find under the hood of things like the Jeep Cherokee or the Honda Pilot and Honda Passport. This is an in-house General Motors design, and it is significantly smoother than that ZF transmission that we see under those other hoods. So if you dislike the way those transmissions shift, don't worry, this does not drive anything like them. This drives more like a traditional automatic transmission. With that out of the way, let's breeze through the competition really quickly. First up, we have the all-new Hyundai Santa Fe. It's one of the newer entries in this segment. The Blazer gets more power than we find in the Hyundai Santa Fe, and we get that extra gear because it only has a 9-speed automatic under the hood. The Santa Fe is less expensive, and it has a long standard warranty, but I think the Blazer is a little bit more styled. So if you want something that's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more unique, this might be a good option. And the interior, I think, actually compares very well to that Santa Fe, although I did find the Santa Fe's seats overall a little bit more comfortable. In terms of overall performance, the Blazer is likely going to go 0 to 60 faster because we get more power under the hood. Next up, we have the Honda Passport, which is all new, and I recently drove, interestingly enough, back-to-back in 2 days with this Chevy Blazer right here. The Honda Passport disappointed me ever so slightly because the interior is borrowed basically 100% from the Honda Pilot. It's almost indistinguishable, and that's front row and second row. The result of that is that the interior, especially in these top-end trims, feels a little bit more premium than what we find in the Honda. The engine produces more power than Honda's V6, and we also have a smoother 9-speed automatic transmission, but we don't have the same kind of torque vectoring ability back here that we do find in the Honda, and it is noticeable. This is again more capable than the standard all-wheel drive system, but not quite that next level. The relative positioning of the Passport and the Blazer is also a little bit different. Unlike the last generation Blazer we had in America, this is not really an off-road focused vehicle like that was. This is more of an on-road focused crossover, and it's really noticeable in the overall driving and handling dynamics of all versions of this vehicle. Whereas the Honda Passport is actually trying to be more of a balanced vehicle, it's trying to give you more rugged off-road ability that you'd find in the average entry in this segment. Of course, if you want real off-road ability, then you'd move on up to one of the other competitors of this, the Jeep Grand Cherokee. That's going to be a lot softer, a lot floatier. We do have more premium options on the inside, and we have more premium engines available than this, but it's going to cost you more as well. The Grand Cherokee gets pretty expensive. Be sure to let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and of course hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, because we will have our hands on this just as soon as possible. We'll run it through our usual 0 to 60 testing, interior cabin noise testing, etc. In the meantime, find us over at facebook.com/AlexsonAutos. Click up there to the top of your screen if you want to support this channel, and I'll see you next week.